Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Road to Recovery Update Training for 2014. My name is Elisa Witt, and I will be guiding you through the presentation today along with an awesome volunteer. Her name is Debbie Coover, and Debbie lives in Sanford, Florida. Debbie has been involved with the Road to Recovery program for over 23 years. She serves as a driver, an area and state trainer, and coordinator. And she's also been involved with other programs and events for the Society. So I will be presenting some of the content today to you, and then Debbie will be talking as well from the perspective as a volunteer. But before we start, the most important thing that we can do on this call today for all of you is to thank you. We at the American Cancer Society appreciate your service to patients and their families with cancer more than you can possibly imagine. Without you, all of our volunteers, all of our road drivers, coordinators, trainers, and everybody involved with the program, there would be no Road to Recovery for many, many patients throughout the United States. And I am so grateful and proud of all of you for your service. In fact, last year in 2013 alone, over 300,000 rides were provided by over 13,000 volunteers. That's incredible. We have never seen a program like this anywhere in any part of the world, a nationwide, coast-to-coast transportation program for people in the most need of help, for people who would have no other way to get to and from their life-saving treatment. So if we don't do anything else on this training today, we want to thank you, and thank you again for all of the service that you have provided in the past and continue to provide for cancer patients and their families. Today we're going to be talking about quite a few topics. I think it would be a great idea as you're listening to this presentation for you to have a piece of paper out in front of you that helps you organize your notes so that you can make some notes about anything you need to remember from this training. We're going to learn all of the nationwide Road to Recovery standards and guidelines, and for the vast majority of you, there really will not be much difference at all in your volunteer experience. For others, there will be some slight changes, and many points on the call will just be for your information. That way, when you tell others about the nationwide Road to Recovery program from the American Cancer Society and hopefully encourage others to volunteer too, you will describe it correctly. Did you know that our drivers and coordinators are consistently our very best new driver recruiters? If you've ever recruited another driver for the program, we want to give you another extra special thank you. And if you've never thought about talking about the program, go right ahead. You'd be surprised how many people have no idea this wonderful volunteer opportunity would even exist for them. And I can tell you from my personal experience that when my brother was laid off his job up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, I told him about the Road to Recovery program, and he was a volunteer driver for about 4 months. And he said it was a wonderful thing to do with his time while he was looking for a job. So it doesn't matter how long people serve. It doesn't matter what else is going on. I think a lot of people just don't know that this wonderful volunteer opportunity even exists. So we're going to move on with our program for today, and up on the screen right now, if you're watching the recording, you see 6 different content areas that we're going to be discussing. And it's important to know why we're having this call today, why you're listening to this recording as your update training. And the reason is that in order for us to have a consistent program nationwide, it's important for road volunteers and coordinators to observe the standards and guidelines of the program. The information we share today will help you know what to expect and should help you feel at ease with your responsibilities and any changes in the standards that may deviate from what your division has been doing previously are only to make the program more consistent nationwide. Now what I'd like you to do is, again, just if you can take out a piece of paper and just make some boxes on that paper and make it look like the slide that you see on your screen right now. This isn't required of the training, but we really feel it would be helpful for you to organize your thoughts. And if you have any questions about anything we're going to be saying on this call today, then you can write them on that piece of paper connected to the category that we're talking about. And if you're just listening to the audio portion of this recording and you're not able to watch the webinar, the categories are defining road, patient eligibility, volunteer eligibility, program coordination, confidentiality, and roles and resources. And I'm going to repeat those once again in case you were busy scribbling and writing those down. Just real quick, I'm going to go through it one more time. These are the main topic areas that we're going to talk about today. And the first one is defining road to recovery, or ROAD, patient eligibility, volunteer eligibility, program coordination, confidentiality, and roles and resources. Now I have the pleasure of turning over the microphone to our awesome volunteer, Debbie Coover. Take it away, Debbie.
Thank you, Elisa. I also want to say thank you to all of the dedicated road volunteers who are on the training today. Road to Recovery really could not function without you, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all that you do for the program. This slide is called Defining Road to Recovery. Standardizing road is important. Our patients expect that we already work this way. Many times in the past, it has been a source of confusion and required extra effort on the part of our patients. A good example of what we're talking about is with a patient who lived in the eastern part of her state on the border with another state. And she was attempting to get rides to her treatment center, which happened to be in the neighboring state. And that also happened to be in a different division. She had been in contact with the coordinator in her state and also with the one in the other state. She was dealing with two separate states, each of them having their own guidelines about what was appropriate type of treatment for the rides and how many days advance notice were to be given for the patient to get the ride, and even dealing with whether or not the drivers could cross a state line into a different division. This caused major confusion not only for the patient but for the coordinators too. And it led to a number of voicemails and service requests and changes and emails and, more importantly, time. All of this was to ensure just to see if the patient could actually get to the rides through our Road to Recovery program. This story is demonstrative of many different patient stories that we've heard throughout the country. You can see how this variation on the road programs did not always serve our patients well. But it also did not allow us to look across the divisions to see how well road was working. So as we move forward as one national company, we will have standards for road, including the standard definition of what road is and what road is not. What is Road to Recovery? The American Cancer Society Road to Recovery program provides transportation for people with cancer to and from their cancer-related medical treatment appointments. Rides are provided by volunteer drivers who donate their time and the use of their personal vehicles. The Road to Recovery program is offered to people with cancer who have no means of transportation or are too ill to drive themselves. Access to transportation is a major factor in cancer treatment, and this American Cancer Society service offers assistance to patients who otherwise might not be able to keep their critical treatment appointments. So why is Road to Recovery necessary? Many patients need weekly and daily life-saving treatments, often over the course of several months. These patients may have no car or are simply too ill to drive. Their family and friends may help, but they may not have the time or financial means to assume the total burden of frequent trips to the treatment centers. And you all know that even the greatest medical advancement cannot be effective if the person can't get to treatment. A successful transportation assistance program can be a tremendous asset to the community. The Road to Recovery program is the very essence of the American Cancer Society's mission: people helping people overcome cancer. As Elisa said, you are a vital part of the Cancer Society's efforts to help patients get to their potentially life-saving treatments, and we sincerely thank you. Now we're going to take a look at patient eligibility.
Great. Thank you so much, Debbie. Now that we've had a chance to define Road to Recovery in a consistent way, let's move on to our next major section, patient eligibility. A reminder before we get into the details. As a volunteer driver, you are not responsible for screening patients for eligibility. We just want you to know how the patients are screened so that you're aware, and we will first review what is not changing and then what might be new so that you are familiar with how the screening process works. To be eligible for Road to Recovery, patients must demonstrate true need. Either they don't have transportation of their own or don't have access to a driver. Patients, of course, may have a vehicle of their own, but often they may be too sick to drive or take some other form of public transportation, even if it is available to them. We want you to understand that all patients are screened before the ride request is approved to make sure that they did demonstrate that they truly have a need. The next requirement, which has always been the case with Road to Recovery, is that patients must be ambulatory, meaning they are able to walk, sit, and stand without assistance. And if they're not, then they must have either an adult caregiver to accompany them to help them walk, sit, or stand, or they could also have some equipment that assists them, such as a cane, a walker, or a wheelchair. These questions about whether or not a patient is able to ambulate on their own, or if they have another responsible adult to assist them, or if they have equipment that they know how to use and operate on their own, then they would qualify for Road to Recovery. Road to Recovery is, and actually always has been, a curb-to-curb service, and patients are told this when they enter the program. If a patient needs assistance getting in and out of your car, we ask that they have a responsible adult accompanying them. That is to protect you as the driver from any potential issues, but also for the safety of the patients. Volunteer drivers can, on their own, if they would like to, offer a guiding hand or arm to lean on, but drivers are not expected to do this as a program standard. We want to ensure the health and safety of all of our patients and drivers. We of course know that patients sometimes do need help walking, but that assistance is not part of your responsibility as a driver. And when you do that, you're actually putting the patient and yourself at risk, as accidents can happen so easily with fragile and sick patients. All treatment centers have wheelchairs and the ability to assist patients out of your car and wheel them into the facility if necessary. We know that the walks to the center's doors may be too long for many, and you can assist the patient by alerting hospital staff that your patient needs their assistance. They have trained staff to help with that. The next eligibility requirement is that the patient will need to be 18 years or older to ride by themselves. Anyone younger than 18 must be accompanied by a parent, guardian, or other responsible adult if the American Cancer Society has obtained verbal or written permission from the parent or guardian then another responsible adult other than a parent could be riding along with that patient. If the patient is very young and requires a car seat or a booster seat based on the state law and where they live, the parent, guardian, or other responsible adult is responsible for providing and assuring that the seat, whether it be a car seat or a booster seat, is safe and secure, and that the child is safe and secure in the seat. Again, the volunteer driver should not take responsibility for any of these situations, and the patients are screened and told that this is their responsibility. The next requirement, which has always been the case, is that patients have to be in active treatment and requesting rides for appointments that are treatment specific, or for appointments that are required to begin or complete treatment. Follow-up appointments and appointments for complementary therapies that are required to begin or continue treatment are also considered for Road to Recovery rides. So just to clarify what that means, Road does cover active treatment, which means chemotherapy or radiation or other things that support those treatments and other types of active treatment. It covers appointments to set up the active treatment, such as a pre-radiation screening appointment, an appointment to set up chemotherapy, follow-up treatment appointments just after therapy has begun to make sure that therapy is working, and complementary therapies to treatments that have been prescribed by their doctor. The only other exception to this is en route or very close to your route, a pharmacy stop is permitted if requested by the patient and it is not too far out of your way. You may choose to accept that request, but you are not required to. Also, it's important to note what Road to Recovery does not cover. It does not cover errands to the grocery store or other errands, support groups, routine screening, even if it's for cancer, diagnostic tests that are not related to active therapy, lymphedema therapy, mental health appointments, alternative therapies that was the patient's choice and not doctor required, and any drop-off point that the patient asks you to take them to other than what was communicated when the ride was requested and what you accepted. We don't encourage alternate drop-off points at all, but sometimes patients ask for that, and if that was approved, then you would know about that prior to receiving the ride. There are some therapies, such as physical therapy and dialysis, that normally would not be part of the program, but if a doctor orders that and says they're necessary to complete their cancer treatment, then those would also be approved Road to Recovery ride requests. What you see on your screen right now are some new requirements for patient eligibility that are part of the nationwide standards for Road to Recovery. Some of these may not be new to all of you, but they are new as a nationwide standard. So one of the standards is that the patient needs to be free from any anesthesia or sedation that would impair their consciousness in any way while they're driving with you in the car. Patients are told this when they're screened. They're also told that if they do receive anesthesia or sedation, that they need to be accompanied by a responsible adult, because again, we need our drivers to focus on driving and on safety and keeping their eyes on the road at all times. We would not want you to have a patient who was falling asleep, passing out because of a medication that they received. And they are told this when they're set up for the ride. We do realize that patients sometimes do have to have sedation and different types of medications for their treatment that would make their consciousness a little off. But we ask that if we know that ahead of time, that they have another responsible adult accompanying them so that you can concentrate on your driving. Another important point of the screening process is patients are asked politely that if they do have any infectious diseases such as a cold or the flu or anything else that's chronic that could be considered contagious, that they take the necessary precautions to protect you as a driver and frankly any other patients that they come in contact with in the treatment center from spreading that infection. So for example, if they did have a cold, they would be wearing a mask hopefully when they got in the car with you. And if they had any other conditions that required special precautions for infection control, that they put those into place with the help from their doctor. Next, Debbie is going to talk about program eligibility for volunteers.
So program eligibility for volunteers. We have just finished reviewing the patient eligibility, which will be handled by the American Cancer Society staff. These changes for volunteer eligibility are for your information and put into place to ensure the safety of our patients and you, our drivers. In addition to the changes for patient eligibility, there are new standards around driver eligibility, which we'll explore on the next two slides. The first slide is our existing requirements, and the second slide will review the new requirements. Not all of these will be new to all of you. It depends on what the requirements were in your area in the past. We will also review the new timing intervals for all of the updates on all of the requirements. So volunteer eligibility, existing requirements. First, what is not changing? Many of these requirements will be familiar to most of you. While these checks occurred in the past, they did not occur in this kind of regularity nationwide. So we are reviewing them here and moving to a nationwide consistency in the requirements. The American Cancer Society is responsible for all of these checks, and you don't need to do anything until asked. And the American Cancer Society will cover any costs that are associated with them. First, you must have a reliable vehicle. Drivers need access to a safe, serviceable, and properly working vehicle with valid tags. Larger vehicles to accommodate a potential companion or a service animal are preferred, but are certainly not required for you to be a driver. Next is driver's license. You must have a valid driver's license in the state in which you are driving for road, or from another state if reciprocity is permitted. Your license will need to have no restrictions for driving during the times when Road to Recovery trips are being provided. Volunteers will have their licenses checked every 2 years. Next is insurance. Drivers will need to have proof of auto insurance on the vehicle according to the state laws in which the vehicle is registered. Volunteers will have their insurance checked every 2 years. Then we have a motor vehicle report check. Drivers will need to have a good driving record to ensure the safety of our patients. This will be done every 2 years for drivers, except drivers between the ages of 18 and 25 and drivers between the ages of 80 and 85. Those drivers will have a yearly motor vehicle report check. Training is next. Drivers will need to be trained by the American Cancer Society on standards and guidelines as you are doing today. Volunteers will need an update training every 2 years or as decided as necessary by the program. If at any time any of this information changes, for instance, you change insurance companies, please let your local American Cancer Society staff partner know this. No action is required at this time on your part in conjunction with these time frames or requirements. An American Cancer Society staff partner will reach out to you when they need any of this information. Volunteer eligibility new requirements. All drivers must be between the ages of 18 and 85. Data shows that older drivers and younger drivers are more likely to be involved in a serious automobile accident than the general population. This change in age requirements for those over 85 will not happen immediately. We really greatly value the service they provide, and we are grandfathering current volunteers into the new policy for 1 year. All drivers will also need to have a clean background check. Background checks will be every 4 years moving forward for both our volunteer coordinators as well as our drivers. All existing volunteers will need to have a background check performed also. Again, when they need any of this information, an American Cancer Society staff partner will reach out to you. No action is required at this time on your part. Alicia?
Thank you, Debbie. Now that we understand who is eligible to receive a ride and who is eligible to deliver a ride, let's move on to the next section where we will discuss what service policies and coordination take place in order to ensure we get patients to their life-saving treatment. Recently, all patient service centers were consolidated into one patient service center located in Austin, Texas. This is the same building that houses our National Cancer Information Center, which is the place that the public typically calls for all things ACS. Cancer-related information, general inquiries about our events and other programs, and brand new Road to Recovery ride requests might start there. That is the 1-800-ACS-2345 number that is our main number for all things ACS in general. Now, while we still rely on our dedicated and awesome local volunteer recovery coordinators, like some of you on the call, at our new centralized and nationwide patient service center in Austin, there are now dedicated Road to Recovery staff that help in a variety of ways. They assist patients in getting them started in the Road to Recovery program. They serve as backups if a coordinator is ill or goes on vacation or just needs some help. They act as the local coordinator until a volunteer can be found to do the job, meaning if one is not available locally, then they serve in this role. When ACS staff are coordinating the road program there at the Patient Service Center in Austin, they are assigned a local focus. There is also a mission delivery staff partner position now called a mission delivery specialist for each geography. These staff may cover a larger area and may not be the same person you worked with prior to the ACS nationwide structural change that happened last year. However, you should know who your American Cancer Society staff mission delivery specialist is. They are there to support you and also recognize your service to the society. If you do not know who your mission delivery specialist is, the first thing you should do is ask your volunteer Road to Recovery coordinator, or if you do not currently work with a volunteer coordinator, you should ask a staff member from the Patient Service Center who that person is and reach out to that staff partner via email or telephone. If you are still having any trouble connecting with that person, but please give them a little bit of time to respond, you should leave a message about that at the Patient Service Center and they will follow up for you. As we talk about our next slide, which is about the referral process, let's take a look at what it really takes to get a ride to a patient from the moment they call in a request to a volunteer taking them to their treatment appointment. We're going to look at the process and we'll highlight the various staff and volunteer roles involved. So on the screen right now, or if you're watching the PowerPoint, if you're just looking at the paper, we're on slide 16, and that is the Road to Recovery process flow. This is a very simplified view of the process flow that a request would take for Road to Recovery. The patient first requests a ride. The patient is asked to provide at least 4 business days advance notice when requesting a ride to ensure that this process happens. This minimum lead time will also ensure that we fulfill constituent requests in the order that they are received and allows our volunteers a courtesy of notice and the proper planning. When the patient requests a ride, the staff person taking the request will see if the Road to Recovery program is in their area and if the patient is eligible. When the patient is eligible and Road is in their area, then the staff person will verify and confirm all the details of the ride. If there's no program or they're not eligible, then the ACS staff person will do their best to find an alternative transportation solution, either through the American Cancer Society or a community resource. There can be case-by-case exceptions for patients, but those would be exceptions in terms of the 4 business days advance notice. We try to stick to this minimum 4-day notice so that we can help as many patients as possible and allow you drivers the courtesy of enough advance notice. After all, Road to Recovery is not a taxi service. With coordinating over 300,000 rides last year nationwide and a great need for more, we have to be mindful that we take the requests in the order that they're received and that we ask our hospital partners and our treatment centers to allow us that courtesy of at least a 4-day notice before we can provide a Road to Recovery ride. After the patient has been screened, the coordinator or the staff at the Patient Service Center begins to match the driver with the ride request. The requests and the details are communicated to the local volunteer road coordinator if there is one. If there's not, then the Patient Service Center staff person will fill this role. The volunteer coordinator will then find a volunteer driver and provide them with the ride opportunity. Due to patient privacy, the volunteer coordinator cannot provide the full name or complete address of the patient they might be driving until after the volunteer driver accepts the ride. I know this may be a change for some of you and it may sound confusing at first, but bear with me and I'll explain further. Only the patient themselves can divulge to others that they have cancer. Even to their family members, sometimes people want to wait until they're ready to talk about it. Although we realize that many coordinators have been sending out the complete list of open rides with all the patient's confidential information, the program standard now is to give just enough information for the driver to be able to decide if they can accept the ride, but not enough to actually know who the cancer patient is until they do accept the ride. For example, the coordinator could even say the street where the person is, the neighborhood, what part of town, and certainly all the details about the appointment length and the treatment center, but they cannot share the full first and last name and exact street address of the patient until the driver has agreed to provide the ride. When the coordinator confirms that the driver will take that particular patient, that is when the coordinator would provide the exact personal information of the patient's full name and full street address. Once a driver is secured, the Patient Service Center staff or local coordinator will inform the patient that they will have a volunteer driver for the ride they requested. This should happen as soon as possible after the driver has accepted the ride. The coordinator should not, however, take directions or other information from the patient. They should simply confirm that the volunteer driver will be calling them 1 to 2 days prior to the appointment to confirm again and to get any other necessary details. That will save the patient from having to repeat themselves multiple times. The volunteer driver then will call the patient again and confirm the ride 1 to 2 days in advance of the ride. It's important to call 1 to 2 days in advance, even if you also choose to call sooner to make sure that nothing has changed for the ride request. So for example, if you're given your week's rides on a Monday and you have a patient that you're going to be taking on Friday, If you really want to call that patient on Monday and just introduce yourself, of course you can, but you would still be asked to call the patient back again the day before the treatment if possible. Keep in mind that it is the volunteer coordinator or the patient service center staff person's job to confirm that the ride has been matched with a volunteer driver, so the patient has already been assured that they will have someone coming. We ask that you call no sooner than 1 to 2 days in advance to confirm the ride, because many times, as you all probably know, things do change with the patient's schedule. Also, there's the weather. We want to confirm the ride 1 to 2 days in advance so that the patient knows and you know that there is a high likelihood that the ride request will be honored as it was originally called in. That being said, when you call the patient 1 to 2 days in advance, any changes that the patient tells you about, whether it be a change in the location of the appointment, a change in the time that you're to be driving them, a change in the time that they're coming back home, or a change in other things such as the ride has been canceled altogether, all of those changes should not be immediately accepted by the driver. The driver should thank the patient for the new information and tell them that someone will be getting back to them shortly to confirm the change. Again, this is because we're coordinating so many rides that the patient service center or your volunteer coordinator needs to be aware of the changes and make sure that it still works for your schedule and their schedule, and we don't want you to be put on the spot with the patient. So as a rule of thumb, you thank the patient for the information and reassure them that somebody will be getting back to them shortly. Then the driver should call the patient service center as soon as possible for approval, and we will also talk a little bit more about this on the next slide. The volunteer coordinator then updates the patient service center after they've delivered the ride with the status of the ride. After the driver has delivered the ride, no later than the day before the ride is scheduled. Okay, I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm sorry. The volunteer coordinator, once the ride has been matched with a volunteer driver, that is when they update the patient service center with the status of the ride no later than the day before the ride is scheduled. Again, so all of our coordination is happening correctly, and we are assured that that patient has been matched with a driver, and we can update our system for coordination. I just want to review, because this may be a change for many of you, the process of setting up the ride. Even if the patient has previously been contacted by a local volunteer coordinator or patient service center staff to verify that they have a driver assigned to pick them up, volunteer drivers will need to contact the patient 1 to 2 days before the ride is scheduled to be delivered. This again is your opportunity to introduce yourself to the patient if you haven't done so already. It's also your opportunity to verify directions to the patient's home if you need to, and to the pickup location and the time of pickup. It also allows time for any changes that may occur. If a driver can no longer provide the ride, maybe because of bad weather or an illness, or if a patient has last-minute changes, then there is still time to notify the patient service center regarding the changes. The phone number that you call, and this is a dedicated phone number for Road to Recovery drivers and coordinators, is now 1-866-949-1518. And I'll repeat that for everyone. It's 1-866-949-1518. This phone number is for volunteers in the Road to Recovery only. It is not for patients. Patients have a separate phone number that once they're in the system of Road to Recovery and receiving rides, that they can call themselves to report any changes. It's also a good idea that the drivers call the patient during business hours. That is so they can reach the patient service center at a time when new arrangements can be made if anything changes about the ride. The patient service center is open Monday through Friday, with early morning hours for those in the east, as well as later hours for those in the west. Volunteer drivers or coordinators should always leave a very detailed voicemail if they do not speak to a staff member with any changes in the approved ride request. Again, this is so that we can be more efficient and get the most number of patients to their treatment appointments in a coordinated fashion. If you have any questions about any of these changes, please contact your mission delivery specialist or your volunteer road coordinator. I also want to let you know at this time that there is a new Road to Recovery volunteer manual. If you haven't seen it yet, you can find it at the Volunteer Learning Center, which we will talk about later in this presentation. The next point I want to bring up, and this is very, very important to all of us, is driver safety. In rare instances, you may encounter a situation that could require refusal to transport a patient. As a volunteer driver, you should contact your local staff partner if any of these issues arise. Your welfare and safety and that of the patient is number one. Some of the rare circumstances that might take place are listed on your screen or on the slide that you're looking at, slide 18. If the patient falsifies answers on his or her request for transportation, if they don't have cancer or they're not in active treatment or anything else they said that we find out later or you find out later was not what they told when they originally were approved for rides, then of course we need to know about that. And when I say we, I mean that patient service center or your volunteer coordinator. If the patient has any type of inappropriate or abusive behavior on the part of the patient or his caregiver, then that is not something that, of course, you are required to put up with as a volunteer driver. We would like you to report as soon as possible to the Patient Service Center if you feel uncomfortable in any way because of a patient's behavior or a caregiver. If the patient is sedated and has no responsible adult accompanying him or her, then again, that is also something that you would want to report to the Patient Service Center. That way the Patient Service Center can reach back out to the patient and or their caregivers and discuss the situation and reiterate the rules and the standards for the Road to Recovery rides. If the patient request deviates from the scheduled ride and the patient is argumentative, rude, or unduly upset with the driver when the request is kindly denied as not part of the Road to Recovery program, then that is something we would also like you to report. Again, we are looking out for your safety and your well-being when you are doing your volunteer service. If the driver believes that his or her personal safety is at risk for any reason whatsoever, you need to let us know so that we can call the patient and take care of the situation, or in rare circumstances, let the patient know that they are no longer eligible for Road to Recovery rides. If you have a situation where you're unsure what to do, and if it's a situation that might place the patient or you at risk, please call the Patient Service Center right away and report the situation. The staff will take whatever steps are necessary to resolve the issue, and you will be notified of anything you need to know about the situation. For questions and concerns that you are not sure about when you're interacting with patients, caregivers, treatment facilities, or even the Patient Service Center, please consult with your local staff partner, the Mission Delivery Specialist, for guidance. Again, if you do not know who your local American Cancer Society Mission Delivery Specialist is, you should check with your volunteer coordinator or the Patient Service Center. Next, we're going to talk about patient confidentiality. There are necessary checks and screenings for every Road to Recovery volunteer. Let's review those now. Scratch that because we already talked about the necessary checks and screenings, but let's talk about patient confidentiality. Keep in mind that the identity of the patient and information provided by that patient is a confidential matter. It's part of your role to respect that. In fact, all information regarding patients, their families, and their medical situation must remain strictly confidential at all times. All staff and volunteers must adhere to this policy to maintain the credibility and the integrity of the Society's Road to Recovery program. Use these guidelines for handling patient information. Keep the information in a secure location, out of sight from even your household members or friends. Do not share or discuss with any others the patient information that would identify their name or where they live. Call the patient from a private, confidential area. Do not assume that all household or family members have been told of a patient's diagnosis. I know that that sounds odd to some people, and I know it did to me at first personally, but some people just need the time to be in their own timing. Some people want to be well into their treatment or possibly even through with their treatment before they share this information with others. As previously shared, it is our jobs, both as staff and as volunteers for the American Cancer Society, to always respect the patient's confidentiality. And that is why it is now a standard that the driver, only the driver who will be taking that particular patient for that ride, would have that patient's full name and address. If you ever suspect a breach in patient confidentiality, please contact your local staff mission delivery specialist or the Patient Service Center. And now Debbie's going to talk about roles and resources.
Thank you, Elisa. Okay, roles and resources. This slide is titled Staff and Volunteer Roles. We all play an important role when it comes to supporting our patient, and there are a few changes to the staff and volunteer descriptions with the new standards. The staff partner, as Elisa has already told you, is now called the Mission Delivery Specialist. The volunteer coordinator, even if it's a staff partner doing the coordination of rides, the role of the coordinator has not changed. It is preferred when we're recruiting new volunteer coordinators that they have access to and be comfortable with technology. But the existing coordinators are not being asked to meet this requirement. Next is volunteer drivers. And we've talked a lot today about what the driver's role is in details. We also have a volunteer trainer. We envision needing to have national volunteer road trainers in the future. These national trainers will likely come from our current list of volunteer regional trainers who are recommended by their divisions. It has not been completely worked out yet, but just know that additional information will be coming soon for this position. Once again, if you're unsure of who your Mission Delivery Specialist staff partner is, you can reach out to your coordinator, or you can call the National Cancer Information Center at 1-800-227-2345, and they can help get you connected with the right person. Now we're going to talk about the Volunteer Learning Center, which is located at volunteerlearning.cancer.org. That's volunteerlearning.cancer.org. Since you are attending today's webinar, you probably had a chance to at least create a profile on the Volunteer Learning Center and register for this Road to Recovery update training. The Volunteer Learning Center is an American Cancer Society training resource designed exclusively for all Society volunteers. It is a website where volunteers can use to access the trainings that will help prepare them for their volunteer roles. Having one centralized site gives all Society volunteers an up-to-date and consistent learning experience. Trainings on the site provide you with functional skills so you will be successful in your volunteer role. The site also helps educate you on other American Cancer Society programs and events, and further develops your knowledge as a Society volunteer and representative. We strongly encourage you to explore this site and feel free to view any trainings that might interest you. However, we do suggest you to check with your staff partner prior to taking any additional trainings to be sure that the program exists in your area and that they need additional volunteers. If you have not yet explored the Volunteer Learning Center, or if you need help gaining comfort with this site, you might consider viewing the Getting Started video. It's on the left-hand side of the home page on the volunteerlearning.cancer.org. Or you can get help from your local staff partner. Also, you can call the number in the Contact Us box on the home page in the lower right-hand corner. That number is 1-855-227-9321, and it is available from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. Central Standard Time. You can always get any of these numbers through the American Cancer Society number 1-800-227-2345. If you misplace the numbers, someone at the National Center can help you. The program materials are also on the volunteerlearningcenter.cancer.org. There are some great new support materials available for you to print or to just reference. They are in the very same spot on the Volunteer Learning Center where you signed up for this webinar. Under the list of webinar sessions, there will be a webinar evaluation form, a course completion certificate, and then the following documents. The Road to Recovery Driver's Manual is available for print or download. This is the new version of the manual, so please dispose of or recycle any old copies that you might have. Please reference your manual as needed after this training. It will serve as a reference and has additional information to what you've been given today. We also have the Road to Recovery Driver Translation Guide. This is a print-on-demand translation guide to help drivers communicate useful phrases and questions in Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese by pointing to the phrase to communicate with the patient. There's also a Road to Recovery Waiting for Patient window sign. This is an optional sign to place in your car window to show that you are waiting for a patient. Let me remind you that this sign does not imply or provide any special parking privileges. It does, however, let patients and potential drivers in the parking lot at the facility know about Road to Recovery. And lastly, there is a volunteer driver transportation report log. This also is optional, but if you want to track your rides for any reason, you might print out this form and use it. It is also useful if you itemize your taxes to keep track of your mileage. If you need a hard copy of any of these materials and you are not able to print them, please reach out to your local staff partner and they will send you what you need. Elisa?
Thanks, Debbie, very much. And we are now close to the end of our program. This is the time for you to look at the page, hopefully that you jotted down at the beginning of the session, and see if there's still any areas of the 6 areas we talked about today that you might still have some questions on. If that is the case and you're listening to the recording, obviously you can't ask your question now, but we would like to make sure that you get your questions answered. Please do not hesitate to reach out to your local American Cancer Society Mission Delivery Specialist. And remember, if you don't know who that person is, you should. You do have a local staff person who is responsible for Road to Recovery in your area. first thing you should do is check with your volunteer coordinator, and the other thing you should do is call the Patient Service Center phone number that was listed in the recording. If all else fails, you can always call the National Cancer Information Center, because that is the main number for all things American Cancer Society. And that number, once again, is 1-800-227-2345, or ACS 2345. That's an easy number to remember. But we want to again thank you for everyone who's listening on the call today and your service to the American Cancer Society's patients and families. And on behalf of the organization, thank you for being a part of the wonderful Road to Recovery program. We wish you luck, and we hope that you will continue to drive and serve our patients for many, many years. Thank you for attending the session today. Goodbye.